Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hi, I'm Alan Cross, and for the next few weeks of the podcast, we're going to dive deep into the ongoing history archives. There are more than 1,000 shows in there, and many of these programs have not been heard for years. So, welcome to an ongoing history of new music archives podcast with a series called The Top 100 Moments in New Rock. Now, bear in mind that these shows originally aired in the spring of 2004, but we thought it might be fun to hear where we've been, how things used to be, and how much everything has changed since. We hope you enjoy this look back in time.
This is the sound of history.
The councils, they ban my concerts and they take my money.
I can't help but have a soft spot for Ziggy Stardust. Not that I'd ever want to portray him again, but it certainly was sort of fun at the time.
Well, apparently we've been told that we've got to stop now and we have to go because there's some trouble outside.
And I looked in through the glass door, and there's this guy laying there with a shotgun laying on his chest and blood running out of his ear.
This is another special project of the ongoing history of new music. The 100 Greatest New Rock Moments Ever. Part 10.
This is the ongoing history of new music podcast with Alan Cross.
Welcome to the final installment of our survey of the 100 greatest moments in new rock. I'm Alan Cross, and there are just 10 events left to cover. Historians call pivotal moments hinge factors, and that's because everything that came after hinged on this specific event. And it's often only in hindsight that we realize how important that little event really was. Now, let me give you an example. You've probably heard of the Avro Arrow, the Canadian state-of-the-art jet fighter developed in the 1950s. By all reports, this was one of the greatest air machines ever developed, and it was Canadian. But on February 20th, 1959, the government canceled the project, throwing 50,000 people out of work. But not everyone was out of work for long. Some of the best engineers were snapped up by this newly created American organization called NASA and became integral parts of an ambitious space program called Apollo. Others found work in Britain and France, working on a new airplane that would be eventually known as Concorde. So, really, who knows if these two projects would have ever succeeded as well as they did had Prime Minister Diefenbaker not canceled the Avro Arrow. Something to think about. New rock moment number 10 is fairly recent, but the fallout has been earth-shattering as far as music and the music industry is concerned. And that's the introduction of the MP3. Now, this is a great story. MP3 technology is the product of the Fraunhofer Institute, a big government research group in Germany. And the key guy is a dude named Karl-Heinz Brandenburg. Karl-Heinz started working on the idea back in 1977 when a colleague was trying to figure out a way to send music down a phone line. Now, the only way to do that was to digitize the music and then compress that file down to just a fraction of its original size. And after years of work, Brandenburg and his team figured out all the necessary compression algorithms and found a way to shrink a music file to 1/10 its original size. And you know what he did when the software was finally finished in 1989? He released it as shareware. In other words, he just let anyone use it for free. But hey, this was 1989. Who knew, right? And when MP3 technology was first unveiled at home in Germany, nobody cared. But when Brandenburg visited Silicon Valley in California in 1997, they went nuts over it. One thing led to another, and within a matter of months, we had Napster. And we all know how that has played out with music fans, performers in the music industry, right? We'll get to some of that in just a moment. So there's a big hinge factor, the introduction of the MP3. What was the first song to be successfully encoded into an MP3? I'll tell you. The answer seems to be Tom's Diner by Suzanne Vega. Tom's Diner? What's so special about that song? Because it had so many delicate passages and big beats, Brandenburg and his team could hear any flaws and glitches in the compression process. All this current turmoil in the industry can be traced back to the father of the MP3, Karl-Heinz Brandenburg, and the day this song was transformed from a wave into an MP3.
the woman who has come in, she is shaking her umbrella, and I look the other way as they are kissing their hellos, and I'm pretending not to see them.
New Rock moment number 10, the invention and introduction of the MP3. There, of course, are now billions and billions of MP3s floating around in cyberspace these days, all thanks to Karl-Heinz Brandenburg and his German research team. New Rock moment number 9 is closely related to that, and while it may not seem like a really big thing now, trust me, it will be prominently mentioned when they write history books 50 years from now. Here's the question. What was the first company to offer a legal pay-per-download music service? Anybody? It was a website called SonicNet. In 1995, this New York-based company started offering singles for download with prices set by the artist, which was anywhere from $1 to $3, and they got to keep all the money from any downloads that were purchased. Hey, there was no real business model for the internet back then, right? So all SonicNet wanted was the prestige of being first. They weren't really concerned about making any profits. So why didn't SonicNet become some huge powerhouse company? Well, they were too far ahead of their time. Back in 1995, it could take hours to download a single song. The first SonicNet downloads could take anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours, depending on your modem speed. This was also in the era before widespread use of MP3s, so the audio quality of one of these downloads can be described as a little better than a bad AM radio. In fact, the company actually described their sound like this: better than an AM radio on a 72 Nova. Yeah, there's a selling point. Still, SonicNet was the first, and look at where we are today. Here's the kind of thing SonicNet was offering for sale long, long before anyone ever thought of iTunes and iPods and Pure Tracks and Napster.
Time takes its crazy toll, and how does your mirror grow? You better watch yourself when you jump into it, 'cause the mirror's gonna steal your soul.
Sonic Youth, and an example of what some of the first legal downloadable music sounded like when SonicNet became the first company to offer such a thing in the middle of 1995. That's New Rock moment number 9. We can zoom right in on moment number 8. On September 24th, 1991, exactly 46,251 copies of a record called Nevermind were shipped to record stores. Everyone in the industry expected the CD to sell 50,000 copies, if they were lucky. No one saw this coming, which is actually kind of weird in retrospect because we really should have seen the warning signs. Rock had grown stagnant with an overabundance of classic rock acts. There were a bunch of hair metal bands that had stopped being amusing with their stupid power ballads. And of course, we had crappy, phony pop stars like Vanilla Ice and Milli Vanilli. A new generation of music fans, the so-called Generation Xers, was coming of age. Not only were they looking for music that could speak to them, they were also angry and scared because of the recession and the Gulf War. And they were looking for someone to act as a spokesperson for them. Not a political voice, but an emotional one. Nirvana was in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, with exactly the right attitude, and exactly the right sound. This kind of confluence comes along once a decade, or maybe just once in a generation. Nevermind was one of those records that changed everything. If you were into music back then, you might remember how once Nirvana got big, all alternative music suddenly got big. In fact, it got so big that it turned the entire world of rock literally upside down. After Nevermind, what was once alternative became the mainstream. New Rock moment number 8, the release of Nevermind from Nirvana on September 24th, 1991. And things, of course, haven't been the same since. When we come back, the TV interview that took punk rock from being this quaint curiosity to the biggest and most dangerous thing in the world. And it all happened in just 117 seconds. The next couple of spots in our countdown of the top 100 moments in new rock are occupied by the Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols were not the first punk rock band to release a single. That honor goes to a British group called The Damned. And they were not the first punk rock band to release an album. The Ramones beat them to it. But when they did get around to finally releasing a record, it was a doozy. The date was Friday, November 26, 1976. The group had been together for just over a year. The first gig had been on November 6 of 1975. And the group had a hell of a time with that first single. They recorded many different versions of it with a bunch of different producers before they were happy with the results. And the final version was produced by Chris Thomas, a guy who had been best known for his work with Roxy Music. The sessions took place in the fall of 1976. The Pistols ran through 5 straight takes of the song. Chris Thomas then took the first half of one take and the second half of another and spliced them together. Well, that seemed to work almost, but the snare drum didn't quite sync up, so Thomas rigged a tape delay to mask the problem. Johnny Rotten came in at about 7 that evening and laid down some of his vocals, and a couple of days later, guitarist Steve Jones was back to overdub his guitars. 22 layers worth of guitars just to, fill out the sound a little bit. On November 26th, it hit the stores, and a new chapter in music history had begun. Great new rock moment number 7. The Sex Pistols released their first single, Anarchy, in the UK. In the first week that song was in the stores in November of 1976, it had little impact outside the punk community. Which brings us to moment number 6. This is the thing that really kicked punk rock into high gear in the UK. Before the afternoon of Wednesday, December 1st, 1976, punk rock was this weird curiosity, found only in the outermost margins of the mainstream press. No one was paying much attention to this new music. One newish band who was getting some press was Queen. In 3 weeks, they were scheduled to release an album called A Day at the Races, the follow-up to A Night at the Opera, a fabulously successful album that contained the worldwide hit Bohemian Rhapsody. It was during this pre-release press tour that their publicity people booked them to appear on a tea-time chat show called Today, which was hosted by this dreary old fart named Bill Grundy. Now, Today was a fairly popular show that reached all corners of the UK. Bill Grundy was kind of like the Oprah of his time. But singer Freddie Mercury suddenly took ill. It was a throat infection or something. And Queen, the band, had to cancel their appearance. This was an absolute disaster. Today was a live show. A replacement guest was needed immediately. At the time, the Pistols were signed to EMI, the same label as Queen, so somebody placed a call to where the Pistols were rehearsing in Camden and told them to wait outside for a limo that would take them to ITV headquarters. They would be on in just 90 minutes. That's how much time they had from the phone call to being on TV. To keep the Pistols happy, the limo was stocked with a bottle of Blue Nun, which of course they finished in record time. At the studio, the green room was stocked with more liquor. And naturally, the Pistols and the contingent of fans they brought with them drank every drop, rather quickly, too. When everyone was finally brought out onto the sets, everyone was nice and drunk. And no one had told them that the show was going out live. That's when Grundy started with some pretty provocative questioning about the nature of this new thing called punk rock. And that's when, have a listen.
I am told that group have received £40,000 from a record company. Doesn't that seem to be slightly opposed to their anti-materialistic view of life?
No, the more the merrier.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, tell me more about it.
We spent it, haven't we?
I don't know, have you?
Yeah, it's all gone.
Really?
Down the boozer.
40, really? Good Lord. Now, I want to know one thing.
What?
Are you serious, or are you just trying to make me laugh?
Gone.
Really?
Yeah.
No, but I mean about what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
You are serious? Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, and Brahms have all died. Really?
Oh,
what are we saying, sir?
Wonderful people.
Are they?
Oh, yes, they really turn us on. What they do?
Well, suppose they turn other people on.
That's just their touch, right?
It's what?
Nothing, a rude word. Next question.
No. What was the rude word? Was it really? Good heavens, you frightened me to death.
All right.
What about you girls behind?
He's like your dad, isn't he, this geezer?
Are you,
Or your granddad.
are you worried, or are you just enjoying yourself?
enjoying myself.
Are you?
Yeah.
That's what I thought you were doing.
I always wanted to meet you.
Did you really?
Yeah.
We'll meet afterwards, shall we?
You dirty son. You dirty old man.
Well, keep going, Chief. Keep going. Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty bastard.
Go on, again.
You dirty
What a clever boy.
What a f***ing rotter.
Well, that's it for tonight. The other rocker, Abel, I'm saying nothing else about him, will be back tomorrow. I'll be seeing you soon. I hope I'm not seeing you again. From me, though, good night.
The impact of that 117-second interview was immediate. Grundy was suspended for 2 weeks. The producer and the director of the Today Show were both fired, and all the newspapers had a field day, running headlines in huge, bold type that said things like, "The Filth and the Fury." It was a major, albeit entirely accidental, press coup. Suddenly, the whole nation was talking about punk rock and how awful it was. Of course, this only served to make the whole scene even more popular. In the week leading up to the Grundy interview, Anarchy in the UK had sold maybe a grand total of 10,000 copies. After the interview, it started selling 10,000 copies a day. Thank you, Bill Grundy. For New Rock moment number 5, we have to go back to America's bicentennial, July 4th, 1976. But it's not about anything that happened in the U.S. that day. As far as rock and roll was concerned, the Apocalypse event happened in Camden, in North London. It was a Sunday night, and the Ramones, who had released their debut album back in April, were part of a triple bill with the Stranglers and the Flaming Groovies at a venue called the Roundhouse. Some 2,000 people, all members of the infant UK punk community, were jammed in that night. They had heard about what the Ramones were doing in New York, and they wanted to see and hear it for themselves. No one could have known it at the time, but this was one of the most influential gigs in the history of rock. Here's how Joey Ramone remembered it.
It was really wild going over to England, where, we were like, we were selling out CBGBs and all. And, there was a wild scene going on there, but when we got over to England, we're playing for 3,000 kids, and everybody was already tuned in to what it was that we were all about. And I remember at the time, the big thing going on in England was pub rock. Dr. Feelgood was the big band at the time, and Brimsley Schwartz. And, doing... I remember we were like treated like royalty when we got there. And then we did this club, Dingwalls. And basically the whole makeup of Dingwalls were all these kids that would later form these kind of groundbreaking bands of their own. And like at our sound check, we met like Johnny Rotten and Joe Strummer and all these people. And they were really, they were totally taken with the band. And really, after that, when we left England at that point, they told us that, we had turned them on, kind of opened them up, and inspired them to form their own bands, basically.
New Rock moment number 5. The Ramones kickstart the entire British punk rock movement with a single gig at the Roundhouse in London, Sunday, July 4th, 1976. Moment number 4 was an accident that set a whole series of events in motion that, you'll see. In the early 1970s, there wasn't any such thing as punk rock. There was some outrageous weird stuff going on in New York, but it was barely what you'd call a scene. There were a couple of places to hang out, but no real headquarters where things could coalesce into anything tangible. Unless, of course, you wanted to count a place called the Mercer Art Center. The Mercer Art Center was located at 240 Mercer Street and was part of the Broadway Central Hotel. The center itself was divided up into a number of rooms so that up to 5 performances could take place simultaneously. The New York Dolls, one of the most important of all the pre-punk bands, along with the Ramones, were known to play some of their very first gigs at the Mercer Art Center. But then something went terribly wrong one Friday in August of 1973. The building started to creak and make all kinds of strange noises. And then suddenly, and without warning, the hotel portion collapsed. Seriously, the building just fell down. 4 people died and 19 people were hurt. And it could have been a whole lot worse because had it happened just a few hours later, there would have been 1,500 people inside. So that was the end of the Mercer Art Center as a hangout. All the weird music freaks had no place to go. At the same time, some guys named Richard Hell, Richard Lloyd, and Tom Verlaine were looking for a place that would let their band play. On their way to the bus stop one day in December 1973, they noticed a bar with the name CBGB Omfug on the sign outside. CBG Omfug were actually the initials of the club's music policy. Country, bluegrass, blues, and other music for uplifting gourmandizers. Seriously, that was the name of the club. Inside, they found owner Hilly Crystal up on a ladder doing some work, and they asked if he might give their band, called Television, some kind of a shot. "You're not open Sundays," they said. "Let us play Sunday nights. I mean, what have you got to lose?" 3.5 weeks later, Television played their first ever rock night at CBGB's, and admission was $1. After something of a rocky start, word began to get around amongst all the Mercer Street regulars that there was something kind of cool happening at CBGB's. And it wasn't long before Hilly Crystal gave up on his blues and bluegrass policy and let all the freaky people in. And throughout 1974 and for pretty much the rest of the decade, CBGB's became ground zero for this new thing called punk rock. The collapse of the Mercer Art Center and the rise of CBGB's in New York, two events that when combined together gave punk rock a place to be born. Here's the band that got things rolling at the club. This is Television. Marquee Moon from Television, the band that got things rolling at CBGB's in late 1973. That, in conjunction with the physical collapse of the Mercer Art Center, is great new rock moment number 4. We are now down to our final events, and moment number 3 is one of those inventions that changed music forever. Don't go anywhere. We're now counting down the final 3 moments in our look at the top 100 events that shaped new rock. And for moment number 3, we have to look at the birth of the instrument that made all this music possible, the electric guitar. So who exactly is responsible for inventing this thing? Well, it depends on who you ask. So I guess the answer is several people, actually. The first is George Breed, a U.S. naval officer who, in 1890, laid the groundwork for what would become known as a guitar pickup. Then there was Lloyd Loar, a master designer of acoustic guitars who founded a company called Vivitone and patented a quasi-electric on January 27, 1934. Out in California, there was Adolf Rickenbacker, whose company introduced an electric lap guitar favored by country performers in the middle 1930s. Then there's George Beauchamp, who designed a skillet-shaped guitar called, appropriately enough, the frying pan. It was the first electric to be built in any significant numbers. In 1941, a guitarist named Les Paul cannibalized a couple of his guitars, creating a brand new experimental thing he called the Log, but he couldn't find anyone to manufacture it. Then in 1949, a company called Fender began working on a solid-body electric guitar, and within 2 years, they were marketing a model called the Telecaster. A year later, a company called Gibson issued a guitar endorsed by Les Paul. So who really invented the electric guitar? Like I said, it depends on who you ask, but this much we know. Without it, rock and roll would have never had a chance. They Might Be Giants with a song called The Guitar. And we played that because new rock moment number 3 is the invention of the electric guitar. Moment number 2 is also an invention, the invention of recorded sound. Now think about it. Without recorded sound, all music would have to be enjoyed as it was being made. A live performance would be the only way to experience music. Thomas Edison was the first. He was trying to come up with a device that could preserve the human voice. And to be honest, he was really thinking about a dictation machine, something that could record great speeches, or maybe something that could automatically answer this new device called a telephone. Seriously, he was thinking about inventing an answering machine. Edison's phonograph was a rotating cylinder covered in tinfoil. You recorded your voice by shouting into a large horn, which in turn moved a needle across the surface of the rotating cylinder, cutting a groove into the tinfoil. To play it back, you put the needle back at the beginning of the groove and turned a crank. The vibrations were then translated back into sound. And the first sounds ever recorded, believe it or not, it was Edison reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb" in 1877. After a decade of refining his machine, Edison moved away from using tinfoil to wax. And would you like a sample of that? I have here a recording from 1896 that was used to demonstrate Edison's invention. It's the Peerless Orchestra playing a medley of hit songs of the day. From 1896, the Peerless Orchestra and a wax cylinder recording that was made using Thomas Edison's phonograph technology. Music could now be captured and enjoyed wherever and whenever anyone wished. Because it's so fundamental to all music, we're going to call this Great New Rock Moment number 2. So here we are at number 1. What could it possibly be? If there was one seminal, unifying, and unforgettable moment for the new rock nation, it came on Friday, April 8th, 1994. The story began to unfold when an electrician noticed a body lying on the floor of a room above a greenhouse.
There's a greenhouse above the garage, and I walked around to the door on the upper side to see about getting access to run a wire in the house or in the garage. And I looked in through the glass door, and there's this guy laying there with a shotgun laying on his chest and blood running out of his ear.
A shotgun laying across, pointing to his neck. And there was a suicide note stuck in a potted plant that had been dumped out.
Good afternoon. This is Officer Vanette Tichy with the Seattle Police Media Update Information Line for April 8th, Friday, and the time is 4 p.m. If you are calling on any update information from the death investigation earlier this morning at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard East, the medical examiner has now made a statement regarding this incident. You may call their recording line at 223-5888. Thank you.
The King County Medical Examiner's Office has positively identified the body of Kurt Cobain by fingerprints. The autopsy has shown that Kurt Cobain died of a shotgun wound to the head, and at this time the wound appears to be self-inflicted. Seattle Police Department, Homicide, and King County Medical Examiners are continuing their investigation.
The fact is, I can't fool you, any one of you. It simply isn't fair to you or to me. The worst crime I can think of would be to pull people off by faking it and pretending as if I'm having 100% fun. I guess thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach for your letters and concern during the last years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody person, and I don't have the passion anymore. And so remember, and don't remember this because this is a lie. It's better to burn out than to fade away. Peace, love, empathy, Kurt Cobain.
In the sun, I feel as one. In the sun, Mary.
The suicide of Kurt Cobain. If you were around then and into music, you will never, ever, ever, ever forget that day. That's New Rock Moment number 1. Here, then, is the top 10 of our 100 greatest moments in new rock. At number 10, it's the invention of the MP3. At number 9, it's the first ever legal downloads in 1995. Nirvana releases Nevermind is at number 8. At 7, the Sex Pistols issue Anarchy in the UK, followed closely by their outrageous interview with Bill Grundy at number 6. At 5, it's the Ramones' groundbreaking gig at the Roundhouse in England. At 4, it's the collapse of the Mercer Art Center and the rise of CBGB as New York's punk mecca. Number 3 is the invention of the electric guitar, while number 2 is the invention of recorded sound. And finally, our top new rock moment, the suicide of Kurt Cobain, that we heard about on April 8th, 1994. Hope you enjoyed this countdown. We've covered some of the biggest events, stuff that you've heard about before. But we also looked at what seemed to be, at least at the time, totally insignificant things that later grew into monumental watersheds. If you missed anything, be sure to go back and listen to the previous podcast episodes. And also, I got to put this in here, considering that it's been 20 years since we originally did this series, maybe it's time for a revisit? I mean, a lot has changed since the spring of 2004. What do you think should be on a new list of the 100 greatest moments in new rock? Let me know at alan@alancross.ca. If you want more like this, there are hundreds of ongoing history of new music podcasts available for free. All the platforms have them. Make sure you follow and like the feed so you never miss an episode. Plus, if you can rate and review, that would be great. We can all meet up on my social media channels. There's my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com, which is updated every day. Plus, there's the free newsletter that goes with it. And I have another podcast. It looks at the intersection of music and true crime. Look for Uncharted, Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry, wherever you get your podcasts. And I welcome any emails. Just drop me a line at alan@alancross.ca. Technical production is by Rob Johnston. We'll talk to you next time. I'm Alan Cross.